In the unforgiving dust of the West, a woman's worth was measured in her silence and her subtlety. But Elara Vance had neither. At over 6 feet tall, she was a landmark in the town of Salvation Creek, a woman made of long limbs and social ridicule. She was the Vance giantess, a target for every cruel joke and a reminder of everything a woman shouldn't be. Men laughed at her, women pitied her, and the wealthiest man in the county, Alistair Finch, was trying to steal the last thing she had, her family's ranch. She was used to standing alone, braced for ruin, until the one day a quiet, steel-eyed cowboy named Griffin Hayes rode into town. He didn't laugh, he just watched, and in one moment at the town's most humiliating auction, he would silence the entire crowd with a single gentle kiss. The dust of Salvation Creek, Texas, settled on everyone the same, but it seemed to cling to Elara Vance with a particular malice. At 6 feet 2 inches in her worn leather boots, Elara didn't just walk through town, she navigated it. She was a moving shadow that preceded her own arrival, a living, breathing spectacle for the townsfolk who preferred their women small, quiet, and breakable. Elara was none of those things. This Tuesday morning was like all the others. She pulled her father's old wagon to a halt in front of Harrow's Mercantile, the wood groaning under the weight of the empty barrels she hoped to fill. Even the simple act of stepping down from the wagon seat was a performance. She didn't hop. She unfolded her long legs, planting firmly on the ground. She felt the familiar burn of eyes on her back as she untied the canvas flap. "Mornin', Miss Vance," called old Jedediah Harrow, the proprietor, his voice laced with that familiar, unwelcome pity. "Mr. Harrow." Elara's voice was low and smooth, a contrast to her imposing frame. She purposefully stooped as she entered the Mercantile, a habit she'd developed at age 14 to avoid cracking her head on the doorframe, and one she'd kept to make herself smaller. The store smelled of dried apples, pipe tobacco, and the sharp tang of Arbuckle's coffee beans. Shelves were packed to the ceiling with bolts of calico tins of peaches and sturdy denim overalls from the Levi Strauss Company. "Just the usual, Mr. Harrow," Elara said, sliding her list onto the polished wooden counter. "Flour, salt, 5 pounds of beans, and a bag of seed corn." "Put it on the account." Mr. Harrow cleared his throat, avoiding her gaze. He busied himself polishing a glass jar that was already clean. "Now, Elara, about that account, it's gotten mighty long." Elara's spine, so used to stooping, went rigid. She straightened to her full height. From this vantage, she could see the dust gathering on the top of the highest shelf, a place Mr. Harrow's own broom couldn't reach. "The note on the ranch is due in 2 weeks, Jedediah," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'll settle up as soon as I sell the calves at the county auction." "That's what your pa always said, God rest him." Harrow finally looked at her, his expression grim. "But the bank ain't your pa, and Alistair Finch ain't the bank. He holds the note, Elara, and he ain't a sentimental man." A cruel chime of laughter erupted from the front of the store. Isabel Sharp, daughter of the aforementioned Alistair Finch, had just entered, flanked by 2 other girls who mirrored her petite frame and expensive silk dresses. Isabel was the town's darling, a perfect porcelain doll of a woman, and she despised Elara with a venom reserved for things that didn't fit. "My goodness," Isabel drawled, snapping her fan shut. "Speaking of mighty long, Elara dear, are you buying out the whole store? I suppose it takes a lot of feed for a creature your size." Her friends tittered. Elara's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her unmanicured nails biting into her palms. She refused to look at them. "I'm conducting business, Isabel." "Business or charity?" Isabel drifted closer, deliberately walking under Ilara's eyeline, forcing the taller woman to look down. "I heard my father is going to take pity on you and your poor sick mother, taking that dusty old ranch off your hands. It'll be a mercy. You could probably get work in a circus. Perhaps I hear they pay well for oddities." The word hung in the air, sharp and ugly oddity. "Ilara ain't no oddity," Mr. Harrow said weakly, though he didn't dare challenge the daughter of the man who effectively owned the town. "Oh, hush, Jedediah," Isabel said, dismissing him. She turned her bright, malicious eyes back to Ilara. "Tell me, Bean Pole," she whispered, using the name the town children shouted. "Does the weather get thin up there? Does it make you lonely?" Ilara's jaw ached from clenching. She looked down at the tiny, perfect woman. "At least I'm not small on the inside, Isabel." Isabel's face hardened. The mask of polite society dropped, revealing the pure spite beneath. "You'll be small enough when you're begging my father for a handout. You'll be on your knees. It'll be the first time in your life you've ever looked normal." Without another word, Ilara turned. She grabbed her empty list from the counter, leaving the phantom order of flour and seed behind. "Ilara, wait!" Mr. Harrow called. But she was already out the door. She didn't stoop this time. The top of the doorframe snagged her bonnet, knocking it clean off her head. She heard the shriek of laughter from Isabel behind her. Mortified, her face burning a deep crimson. Ilara scooped the bonnet from the dirt and practically threw herself onto the wagon seat. She cracked the reins, the mules lurching forward. She didn't slow the team until Salvation Creek was a small, dusty memory behind her. Only then, with the vast, uncaring expanse of the Texas prairie stretching out before her, did she let the first hot, angry tear fall. She hated her height. She hated this long, clumsy body that made her a target, that made her unfeminine, undesirable, and weak despite her strength. She hated that she couldn't get the seed corn. The auction was in 2 weeks. If she had nothing to sell the Vance homestead, the only home she'd ever known would belong to Alistair Finch, and she and her sick mother, Martha, would be thrown out onto the dust. Griffin Griff Hayes rode into Salvation Creek with the setting sun at his back. He wasn't a man who made a lot of noise. His horse, a powerful buckskin, moved with a quiet, ground-eating stride. His clothes, denim trousers, a plain cotton shirt, and a battered hat were clean but worn. The only thing that shined on him was the Colt revolver holstered low on his hip, its wooden grip smooth from use. He wasn't tall, not like Ilara. He was maybe 5'10", solidly built, with the kind of physical confidence that came from hard work, not arrogance. His eyes, the color of gunmetal gray, missed nothing. He wasn't a drifter, though he looked the part. Griff Hayes was a cattleman from the Northern Territories, and he was here on business. He was here to find the best watered land in the county, and rumor had it that land was the Vance homestead. He tied his horse outside the Dusty Spur Saloon, the only one in town that didn't have a piano player. He preferred it that way. He pushed through the batwing doors and the noise hit him, cigar smoke, the clack of poker chips, and the loud, braying laughter of men letting off steam. Griff took a stool at the far end of the bar and ordered a beer. He was a patient man. The best information was never bought. It was overheard. He didn't have to wait long. A group of ranch hands, still covered in trail dust, were gathered at a nearby table. Their leader was a big, brutish man with a red face and a loud mouth. Griff recognized his brand, the Circle F of Alistair Finch's ranch. "I'm telling you, Bart," one of the younger hands said, "Finch is gonna own everything from here to the river by Christmas." The big man, Bart Drummond, slammed his mug down. "Course he is, starting with the old Vance place. Should have been his years ago. Old man Vance just held on out of spite." "What about the daughter?" another hand asked, snickering. Bart's laughter boomed. The Vance giantess. What about her? She's near 7 feet tall and just as ugly. Finch'll have to pay someone to haul her off the property. I heard, the first hand said, leaning in, that she's strong as an ox. Saw her lift a full-grown calf by herself. That's 'cause she is an ox, Bart roared. She ain't a woman, she's a long-legged mistake. I'd like to see the man desperate enough to court that he'd need a ladder. The table exploded in laughter. Griff took a slow sip of his beer, his eyes flat and cold. He despised men who took their pleasure in mocking the vulnerable. He filed the name Bart Drummond away. He finished his beer and left a coin on the bar. He had what he needed. He knew Alistair Finch was making his move, and he knew the town's consensus on the current owner. He stepped back out into the cooling twilight. As he was about to untie his horse, the sound of a wagon rattling down the street caught his attention. It was the wagon from earlier, the one he'd passed on the trail, pulled by 2 tired-looking mules. The wagon stopped not at the mercantile, but at the feed store at the edge of town, the one known for selling last year's damaged goods for pennies on the dollar. A woman climbed down, and down, and down. Griff stopped his hand on his horse's rein. He'd heard the talk in the saloon, but the reality was something else. She was tall, yes, taller than him by a good margin. But she wasn't an ox. She wasn't ugly. She moved with a weary grace, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She was wearing a faded gingham dress that was clearly too short, the cuffs ending several inches above her wrists. Her profile, illuminated by the last rays of sun, was strong, a straight nose, a determined chin, and a cascade of chestnut hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked magnificent, like a solitary pine tree in a field of scrub brush. He watched as she approached the feed store owner, a shifty man named Peters. He saw the negotiation, the head shaking, the desperation in her posture. Finally, Peters pointed to a stack of feed sacks near the loading dock, clearly rain-damaged. Elara nodded her shoulders, slumping further. She turned to the wagon, grabbed a 100-pound sack of feed, and in one smooth, powerful motion lifted it and swung it into the wagon bed. The mules didn't even shuffle. She went back for the second, then the third. Bart Drummond and his men spilled out of the saloon, spotting the scene. "Looky there!" Bart shouted, pointing. "Doing a man's work, just like we said. Hey, giantess, need a hand, or are you too big to be helped?" Elara froze, her back to them. Griff could see the tension in her entire body. She ignored them, reaching for the 4th sack. "What's the matter, too good to talk to us?" Bart swaggered closer, his spurs jingling. Griff had seen enough. He moved quietly, stepping between Bart and the wagon. "Seems to me." Griff said, his voice quiet but carrying, "The lady's busy." Bart stopped. He hadn't seen Griff approach. He looked the newcomer up and down, noting the average height, the plain clothes. Then he sneered. "Well, well, a hero. You planning on rescuing her little man, you'll have to climb." Griff didn't so much as blink. "I don't need to climb, but you need to back away." Bart's hand twitched toward his own sidearm, but something in Griff's stance, the perfect stillness, the absolute lack of fear, made him hesitate. This wasn't some farm boy. This was a man who knew how to use the gun he carried. "It's just a bit of fun," Bart grumbled, taking a half step back. "Your fun's over," Griff said. "Move on." Grumbling, Bart gestured to his men. "Come on, boys. Let's leave the lovers alone. He can be her little dog at her big feet." They retreated to the saloon, still laughing. Griff turned to Elara. She was staring at him, her face pale, her eyes wide, with a mixture of shock and suspicion. No one had ever stepped in before. "Thank you," she said, her voice stiff. "No need for thanks." Griff tipped his hat. He was being a loud-mouthed fool. He gestured to the remaining sacks. "May I?" Ilara bristled. "I can manage." "I know you can," Griff said simply. "I saw you. But the sun's down." He didn't wait for permission. He grabbed the last 2 sacks, one in each hand, and loaded them into the wagon with an ease that spoke of his own surprising strength. He turned back to her. He had to look up. He met her gaze directly, his grey eyes, unreadable. He wasn't staring at her forehead or her chin. He was looking her in the eyes. "Griffin Hayes," he said. "Ilara Vance." "Miss Vance," he nodded. "You're running the old Vance place, then?" "I am," she said, her tone daring him to comment. He didn't. He just said, "Good land, has the best water rights in the county." Ilara was stunned. He spoke of her ranch, not her height. He spoke to her like a landowner. "It is," she said, finding her voice, "if I can keep it." "Men like Finch don't fight fair," Griff observed. "I'm learning that." She climbed onto the wagon seat, her movements less guarded now. She looked down at him. "Why did you help?" Griff looked back up at her, his hat in his hand. The saloon light caught the planes of his face. "I don't like bullies, Miss Vance, and I respect hard work. You've got a long ride." He stepped back. Ilara watched him for a moment longer, this quiet, unassuming man who had silenced Bart Drummond without raising his voice. Then she clucked to the mules and guided the wagon into the dark. Griff Hayes stood in the street long after she was gone, the sound of her wagon fading. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't just here to buy land. He was here to make sure Alistair Finch didn't get this one. The Vance homestead was nestled in a shallow valley, protected from the worst of the wind. It was good land. The problem wasn't the land. It was the sheer lack of manpower and money to work it. The fences were down in the east pasture. The barn roof had a leak the size of a dinner plate, and her small herd of cattle, 25 head down from 200 in her father's day, was thin. Ilara arrived home to the smell of kerosene and the sound of her mother's dry, persistent cough. Martha Vance was a small, bird-like woman, made even smaller by the consumption that was slowly eating her away. She was propped up in her chair by the cold stove, a patchwork quilt over her lap. "You were gone so long, Ilara," Martha whispered, her voice frail. "Mr. Harrow was busy. I had to go to Peter's for the feed." Ilara didn't mention the confrontation. She didn't mention Isabel, and she certainly didn't mention the stranger. "Peter's. Oh, Ilara, that's sweepings and dust. It's not fit. It's what we can afford, Mama." Ilara began the grueling task of unloading the 100-pound sacks, carrying them from the wagon to the small pantry. Her mother watched, her eyes filling with tears. "It's not right." Martha coughed, a painful rattling sound. "A daughter of mine, doing the work of 3 men. You should be married, cared for. You're a good girl, Ilara. You're so strong." Ilara stopped her back to her mother, a sack of feed halfway to her shoulder. She knew what her mother meant. "You're so strong." It was a compliment that always felt like a curse. It was a stand-in for pretty or charming or desirable. It was what people said when they meant unfeminine. "I am strong, Mama," Ilara said, forcing the cheer into her voice. "And I'll care for us. You just rest." "Alistair Finch stopped by," Martha said, her voice dropping. Ilara's blood ran cold. She turned slowly. "What did he want?" "He was polite, smiled, said he heard we were having trouble. He offered to buy the note, to take this burden from us. He offered $200. $200 for land worth 10 times that. It was an insult. It was theft dressed up in a gentleman's suit. "What did you tell him?" Ilara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I told him I told him he'd have to speak to you. That you handle the business. Good. Ilara nodded, her jaw set. He'll get his answer. Her answer came the very next afternoon. Alistair Finch rode up not on a ranch horse, but on a sleek black carriage, as if he were visiting royalty. He was a portly man who wore a waistcoat, despite the heat, his face perpetually flushed with self-importance. Ilara met him on the porch. She didn't invite him in. She stood her arms crossed her full height, making her level with him, even as he sat in his high-perched carriage. "Miss Vance?" he boomed, smiling a smile that didn't touch his cold eyes. "A pleasure. I was just discussing a small matter with your dear mother. I handle the business, Mr. Finch." Finch's smile faltered. He clearly wasn't used to being interrupted, especially by a woman. "Of course. A modern woman. How novel. Then you'll understand my offer is a generous one. $200, cash, enough to see you and your mother settled in a nice room in, say, San Antonio. A fresh start. My start is here, Mr. Finch. My roots are here. This land is not for sale." Finch's facade cracked. He leaned forward, his voice losing its forced pleasantry. "Miss Vance, let us not play games. You are 2 weeks from default. The bank will foreclose. I will be at that auction, and I will buy this land. My offer of $200 is a courtesy. At the auction, you'll get nothing." "Then I'll get nothing," Ilara said. "But I won't sell it to you." "You are a fool, girl." Finch snapped, his face turning purple. "A stubborn, overgrown fool. You think you can run this place. You think anyone in this county will help you? You are a joke. You and this pile of rotten wood, you'll come crawling to me when your mother is starving, and my offer will be 100. Ilara took a step off the porch. She walked directly to his carriage, stopping so close she could smell the bay rum on his cheeks. She looked down at him. She used the one thing she had, the one thing everyone mocked her for. She used her size. "You are on my property, Mr. Finch," she said, her low voice vibrating with controlled fury. "I will not have you upsetting my mother. You will leave. And if you ever speak to me or my mother that way again, I will lift you from that carriage and set you on your backside in the dirt." "Do you understand me?" Finch was so shocked, so utterly enraged at being threatened by this woman that he was speechless. He sputtered, grabbing his whip. "You'll regret this. You'll be the laughing stock of the state." "I'm already the laughing stock of the county, Mr. Finch," Ilara shot back. "I find I'm developing a thick skin. Now get off my land." He snapped the reins, the carriage lurching away in a cloud of dust. Ilara stood there, shaking not from fear, but from adrenaline. The victory felt hollow. He was right. She had no allies, she had no money, she had 2 weeks. She turned to go back inside, and that's when she saw him. On the ridge overlooking her valley, a lone rider. The buckskin horse was unmistakable, Griffin Hayes. He'd seen the whole thing. He didn't ride down, he didn't interfere. He simply watched her for a long, silent moment. Then from that distance, he raised his hand and slowly, deliberately tipped his hat to her. A sign of respect. Ilara, for the second time in as many days, was so stunned she didn't know how to react. She gave a short, jerky nod and fled into the house. The Sunday social was Ilara's weekly trial by fire. It was held on the lawn outside the small whitewashed church, and attendance was mandatory for any family wishing to be considered respectable. For Ilara, it was 90 minutes of pure, unadulterated humiliation. Her mother, too frail to attend, had insisted Ilara go. "You must show them we are not beaten, Ilara. Hold your head high." Holding her head high was the problem. It just made her stand out more. She wore her only good dress, a dark blue calico. She had let the hem down on twice. It was still too short-ending at her shins. The waist sat too high, and the sleeves strained against her broad shoulders. While other women gathered in delicate laughing clusters, Ilara stood alone by the lemonade table, a giant silent monument to social failure. The men dressed in their stiff Sunday suits avoided her. The women fluttering their fans whispered behind their hands. Ilara could read their lips. Tragic. So unfortunate. Poor Martha. Then the whispers changed. A new energy buzzed through the crowd. "It's him, the stranger. Isabel says he's a wealthy cattle buyer." Griffin Hayes had arrived. He looked different than he had in the street. He was clean-shaven, his dark hair was combed, and he wore a dark jacket that made his shoulders look even broader. He was, Ilara realized with a jolt, devastatingly handsome in a quiet, rugged way. And Isabel Sharp was already on his arm. "Mr. Hayes, you must try Cook's lemon cakes. They are simply divine," Isabel cooed, steering him through the crowd like a prize she'd already won. She was playing the part of the perfect delicate hostess, batting her eyelashes and laughing at everything he said. Griff, for his part, looked vaguely uncomfortable but polite. Isabel spotted Ilara. A wicked, triumphant gleam entered her eye. This was too perfect. She would humiliate her rival in front of the one man who had shown Ilara a shred of decency. She dragged Griff toward the lemonade table. "Oh, Ilara, dear," Isabel said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm so glad you came. I was afraid you'd be too busy mending fences or wrestling steers." The women nearby tittered. Ilara's face went blank, her defense mechanism. "Mr. Hayes," Isabel continued, "you've met Miss Vance, haven't you? She's our town's... well, she's our Ilara." Griff's grey eyes met Ilara's. He nodded. "Miss Vance. Isn't it just the saddest thing?" Isabel pressed on, ignoring the warning stillness in Griff's expression. "All that height. It's such a terrible burden. My father says it's a blessing she's strong since she'll never find a husband. Who would have her? A man wants a woman he can protect, not one who can protect him." The humiliation was complete. It was one thing to be mocked by men in a saloon. It was another to be clinically dissected and dismissed as unwomanly by the town's reigning belle in front of the entire church-going population. Ilara set her lemonade glass down. She was done. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. "If you'll excuse me, Isabel. Mr. Hayes." She turned to leave. "Wait." Griff's voice was not loud, but it cut through the chatter. He gently but firmly detached his arm from Isabel's grasp. He took a step toward Ilara, ignoring the shocked gasp from Isabel. He stopped in front of Ilara. He didn't mention Isabel's comments. He didn't offer pity. He simply looked at her with the same serious, respectful gaze he'd used in the street. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice carrying to the nearby listeners, "I was looking at your land from the ridge yesterday. I noticed your herd. Are those long horns crossbred with Hereford?" Ilara stopped her back, still half-turned. She slowly faced him. She was confused. This was not the conversation she expected. "They are," she said, her voice rusty. My father believed the crossbreed would be hardier. Better beef, but still has the longhorn's resilience to drought." "He was right," Griff said, nodding. "It's a smart play. Most ranchers are too stubborn to mix the bloodlines. They're all set on one or the other." "My father was a smart man," Ilara said, a spark of pride in her voice. "He must have been," Griff agreed. "But I noticed your fencing is down on the east pasture, near the arroyo. You'll lose them in the next heavy rain if you're not careful." I'm aware," Ilara said, flushing. I haven't had the hands to fix it." "It's a two-man job," Griff said, "but a single person could brace it if they knew how to set a proper H-brace at the corners. It takes leverage." He was talking to her. Not as a woman, not as a giant, but as a rancher. He was discussing bloodlines and fencing, giving her practical, valuable advice, in front of everyone. Isabel, seeing her audience and her moan slipping away, tried to intervene. "Mr. Hayes, honestly, don't bore the poor thing with fences. She's a lady, not a field hand." Griff didn't even look at her. His eyes remained on Ilara's. "You're not boring me, Mr. Hayes," Ilara said, and for the first time that day, she let her shoulders straighten to their full, proud width. She looked directly at him, no longer trying to shrink. "And I'd be interested to hear your theory on H-braces. The soil in that arroyo is loose." "That's the trick," Griff said, a small, rare smile touching his lips. "You have to sink the post deeper than you think." He proceeded to have a 5-minute, detailed, technical conversation with her about fence posts. To the crowd, it was baffling. To Isabel, it was a declaration of war. To Ilara, it was a lifeline. He was treating her as an equal. He was validating her work. When he was done, he nodded. "Smart. You'll have no trouble. It was a pleasure, Miss Vance." He turned, gave a polite, distant nod to the fuming Isabel, and walked away. Ilara watched him go. She was still standing alone by the lemonade table, but something had irrevocably shifted. She was still the town giant. But now she was the town giant who knew how to build a proper H-brace. And for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. The Texas sky had a way of turning on you. It could be a clear, placid blue one moment, and a churning mass of bruised purple and green the next. That's what happened 3 days after the social. A northerner blew in fast and violent. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in an hour. The wind howled, and the sky opened up. This wasn't a gentle rain. It was a deluge, a wall of water that turned the dry, cracked earth into a sea of running mud. Ilara's first thought was not for the leaking roof. It was for the east pasture. "The arroyo!" she yelled to her mother over the roar of the storm. "Ilara, no, you can't!" Martha shrieked from her bed. "It's not worth it. It's just cattle." "It's the only thing, Mama," Ilara yelled back. She was already in her father's heavy oilskin slicker, which for once was the right size. "It's the auction." She grabbed a rope and ran to the barn, her boots sinking deep into the mud. She saddled her most sure-footed horse, a rangy gelding named Buster, and rode out into the heart of the storm. The world was a deafening, blinding chaos of wind and water. The arroyo, usually a dry, sandy ditch, was now a raging brown river, 10 feet deep and rising, and on the wrong side of it, huddled in terror, were 10 of her best calves. The fence line Griff had warned her about was completely gone, washed away. "Higher!" Ilara screamed, forcing Buster down the slick embankment. The calves were trapped on a small, shrinking island of high ground. If she didn't get them across now, they'd be swept away. She plunged her horse into the churning water. Buster fought the current, swimming hard. Ilara threw her loop, snagging the lead calf. She dragged it, bawling back across the current. 1. She went back. 2. 3. The work was brutal. She was soaked to the bone, her hands numb and raw from the wet rope. The rain felt like tiny needles. On her 4th trip, the bank on the far side, already undercut by the water, gave way. A ton of mud and rock slid into the arroyo, right where her horse was scrambling for purchase. Buster screamed as the mud slide hit his legs. He reared, lost his footing, and went down. Ilara was thrown clear, but she landed hard in the shallow, fast-moving water, her ankle twisting violently under her. She cried out a sharp, broken sound. She tried to stand, but a searing pain shot up her leg. Her ankle was broken, or at least badly sprained. Buster was struggling to get up, panicked. The remaining calves were bellowing. She was stranded injured, and the storm was getting worse. "Help!" she screamed, though she knew it was useless. "Somebody help me! Hold on!" The voice was not the wind. It was real. Through the curtain of rain, a rider appeared on the ridge. Griff Hayes on his powerful buckskin, which was handling the slick mud as if it were dry ground. He didn't hesitate. He spurred his horse down the embankment, taking a less direct but safer route. He was in the water in seconds. He ignored her and went straight for her horse, grabbing Buster's bridle, calming the panicked animal with his voice and a firm hand, and leading him to the safety of the near bank. Then he was back for her. He dismounted in the knee-deep water and waded to her side. "Can you stand?" he yelled over the wind. "My ankle, I think it's broken." He assessed the situation in a second. The rising water, her obvious pain, the calves. "The calves have to wait," he said, his voice firm. "They'll find high ground. You won't." Before she could protest, he bent down. He was shorter than her, but his strength was compact and absolute. He put one arm under her knees and the other around her back, and he lifted her. Elara gasped. She who had spent her life lifting was being lifted. She who towered over every man was being carried. She weighed well over 170 pounds, and he was carrying her through a rushing current as if she were a child. He placed her securely on his own horse, mounting up behind her. "Hold on to the saddle horn," he commanded. He grabbed the reins of her horse, and with the storm raging around them, he led the small procession out of the arroyo and back toward the safety of her barn. He got her inside the wind, slamming the heavy barn door shut behind them. The roar of the storm was instantly muffled, replaced by the sound of their own breathing and the dripping of water. "Let me see," he said, his voice back to its normal, quiet timbre. He knelt in the hay and gently, so gently, began to unlace her soaked boot. Elara flinched, biting her lip. "It's all right," he murmured. "I'm just looking." He eased the boot off. Her ankle was already swelling, turning a dark, angry purple. "It's a bad sprain," he said, his touch surprisingly deft as he probed the joint. "Not a break, I don't think, but you're not walking on this for a week." "A week?" Elara said, panic rising. "The auction is in 10 days. The fences." "The fences will wait." He looked up at her. She was sitting on a bale of hay, her wet hair falling out of its bun, her father's oversized slicker puddled around her. She felt for the first time small. "You're shaking," he said. He stood unstrapped the bedroll from his saddle and pulled out a dry wool blanket. He wrapped it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. You didn't have to." "I was riding the edge of your property," he said, as if that explained everything. "Checking the water levels. You were a long way from town." "I wasn't in town," he said. "I've been camping, near your eastern ridge." Elara stared at him. "For how long?" "Since the social." He'd been watching her, not in a cruel way, but in a protective one. He had been nearby just in case. "Why?" she asked, her voice small. Griff busied himself with the horses, rubbing them down with dry sacks. "I told you, I don't like bullies, and Alistair Finch isn't the kind to give up just because you told him to." They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the rain drumming on the roof. The leak her father had never fixed was dripping in the corner. "You'll lose the rest of the calves," Elara said, her voice hollow. "I've failed." "You saved 4. Griff countered, not looking at her. "In a storm that would have kept any other man in this county indoors. You didn't fail Miss Vance. You were outnumbered." He finished with the horses and came back to her. He sat on a different hay bale, a respectful distance away. "You love this land, don't you?" he asked. She nodded, clutching the blanket. "It's all I have. It's all my father left us. It's the only place in the world where my size doesn't matter. The land doesn't care how tall I am, it just is." "I understand that," Griff said. "And you?" she asked. "Why are you really here, Mr. Hayes? You're not just a drifter. You're a cattleman. I can tell by your hands and the way you talk." He smiled, a true, warm smile that transformed his serious face. "Guilty. I'm looking for a place to start my own herd. I sold my stake in a ranch up in Wyoming. I've been looking for a place with good water and good grass." Ilara's heart sank. "Like my place?" His smile faded. He met her gaze. "Yes, like your place. I heard it was coming up for auction." "So you're here to buy it," she said, the blanket suddenly feeling cold. "You're just like Finch." "No," he said, his voice sharp. "I'm not. I don't steal land from women and sick mothers. I pay fair value. But I won't be bidding against you, Miss Vance. You won't No, because Alistair Finch is going to outbid everyone. He's not buying it for its value. He's buying it for his pride. He can't be beaten, especially not by you." The truth of it hit her. He was right. Finch would pay any price just to win. "Then it's over," she whispered, the last of her fight draining away. "It's all over." Griff stood up. He walked over to her. He knelt again, so they were on the same level. "The auction is 10 days away," he said. "You have a sprained ankle, but you still have 4 calves, and you have me. It's not over, not by a long shot." Ilara looked into his steady grey eyes. He wasn't lying. He wasn't pitying her. He was offering. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Right now," he said, "I'm going to get you back to your house, and then you and I are going to make a plan. Finch wants to play dirty. He's about to find out what happens when he plays against someone who's smarter." The day of the auction arrived clear and hot, as if the storm had never happened. The whole of Salvation Creek was gathered on the steps of the town hall, which also served as the bank. It was the biggest social event of the season, a place for business gossip and public ruin. Ilara was there. Her ankle was tightly bound, and she walked with a heavy limp, using a rough-hewn cottonwood branch as a crutch. Her mother was at home, praying. Ilara stood at the back of the crowd, her head held high, just as her mother had asked. She had groomed her 4 remaining calves until their coats shone. It wasn't enough, but it was all she had. Alistair Finch was at the front, magnificent, in a new tweed suit, his daughter Isabel on his arm. Isabel was wearing a bright yellow dress and looked like a canary scanning the crowd for Griff. But Griff was nowhere to be seen. He had visited Ilara every day for the past week, bringing her food, mending her fence with the H-braces he'd described, and talking late into the night. He had a plan, he said. "Just trust me," he'd insisted. "And no matter what happens, do not bid." Now, seeing him absent, Ilara's stomach filled with a cold, sick dread. Had it all been a lie? Had he been another man, pitying her only to abandon her when it mattered? The auctioneer, a fast-talking man from Austin, began. Horses, wagons, and farmland were sold one after another. Bart Drummond and the Circle F hands were there laughing and making loud bids on Finch's behalf. Then the auctioneer called it. And now for our final item, the property known as the Vance Homestead, 200 acres of prime valley land with full river water rights, a true gem. A hush fell. This was the main event. "What's the opening bid? Do I hear 500? 500. Alistair Finch's voice boomed, full of confidence. The auctioneer grinned. "I have 500. Do I hear 6? Silence. No one would bid against Finch. 500 going once. Going twice. 1,000. The voice was clear, calm, and came from the edge of the crowd. Every head turned. Griffin Hayes was leaning against a pillar, his arms crossed, his hat pulled low. He looked as if he were commenting on the weather. Alistair Finch's head snapped around. His face went from smug to thunderous. Isabel gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "I have 1,000!" The auctioneer cried, his energy restored. From the gentleman in the back, do I hear 1,100? 1,100! Finch snarled. 1,500, Griff said without uncrossing his arms. 1,600! 2,000! The crowd was mesmerized. This was not a bidding war, it was a duel. Finch was sweating now, his face crimson. He was bidding on land, but Griff was bidding on something else. "Mr. Finch," the auctioneer said, "the bid is 2,000. 2,000. 500, Finch yelled. This was 5 times what he'd offered Ilara. 3,000, Griff said, his voice level. "He's mad," Isabel whispered, loud enough for all to hear. "Papa, he's just a drifter. He doesn't have that money." "He's bluffing," Finch agreed. He turned to the auctioneer. "I demand to know if this man has the funds." The auctioneer paused. "That is irregular." "It's not," Griff said. He pushed off the pillar and walked forward. He didn't look at Finch. He walked straight to the auctioneer's table and pulled a folded paper from his inside pocket. It was a bank draft from the main bank in Austin. The auctioneer's eyes went wide. He looked at Griff with newfound respect. "The gentleman's funds are more than sufficient. The bid stands at $3,000. Do I hear 3,100, Mr. Finch?" Ilara watched her heart hammering against her ribs, so hard she thought she might be sick. Finch was trapped. To back down now in front of the whole town would be a public humiliation. But this drifter was prepared to pay far more than the land was worth. "He's trying to ruin me," Finch hissed to his daughter. "Then ruin him, Papa," she hissed back. "Win 3,100, Finch roared. Griff looked for the first time directly at Finch. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. 4,000. A collective gasp went through the crowd. That was a fortune. That was more than any ranch in the county had ever sold for. Alistair Finch froze. He had reached his limit. He looked at his daughter, at the crowd, at the smug face of the auctioneer. He had been beaten, publicly, by a no-name drifter. "Going once, Mr. Finch." Finch said nothing. He was trembling with rage. "Going twice." "Soldo," the auctioneer slammed his gavel. "To Mr. Griffin Hayes for $4,000. A stunned silence, then a burst of applause from the smaller ranchers who had long hated Finch. Finch, his face a mask of pure fury, grabbed his daughter's arm and stormed away, pushing through the crowd. It was over. Ilara's legs gave out. She leaned heavily on her crutch, tears of relief and a strange, sharp grief blurring her vision. She had been saved. Her land was safe, but it was not her land. She had just traded one master for another. A kind one, perhaps. A gentle one, but still a master. The Vance homestead was gone sold to the stranger who had been camping on her ridge. The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with the news. Griff finished signing the papers, his face impassive. Ilara stood rooted to the spot, alone again in her victory, which felt so much like a defeat. Then the confrontation she had been dreading began. Isabel Sharp, having broken free from her father, marched back. Her face was twisted with a rage that made her porcelain features look cracked and ugly. She wasn't cooing now. She was shouting. "You," she shrieked, pointing a gloved finger at Griff. "You, what have you done?" You spent a fortune on that. That worthless pile of mud for her." She spun on Ilara, her eyes shooting venom. "This is your fault, you freak. You tricked him. You think he wants you. He just bought your land. He owns you now just like he owns the cattle." Bart Drummond and his cronies, who had been slinking away, saw a new show starting. They gathered around, snickering. "Yeah, Griff," Bart called out, emboldened by Isabel's attack. "What are you going to do with her? She comes with the deed, does she? That's a mighty tall price to pay for a mighty tall woman." "He'll have to build a taller door," another man shouted. "Maybe he likes climbing," Bart roared, and the men howled with laughter. This was it. This was the moment Ilara had feared her entire life. The culmination of every whisper, every jeer, every oddity and beanpole. She was the center of a public spectacle, the butt of the cruelest joke. Her savior Griff was being mocked for his association with her. She squeezed her eyes shut, the hot, bitter tears of shame finally spilling over. She wanted to sink into the ground. She wanted to disappear. She clutched her crutch, bracing for the final killing blow. "That's enough." Griff's voice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was cold steel. The laughter died instantly. He turned to Isabel. "You are your father's daughter, Miss Sharp. All venom, no substance. Get out of my sight." Isabel looked as if he'd slapped her. You, go!" She fled sobbing in rage. Griff then turned his flat grey eyes on Bart Drummond. "You," he said. "You have a big mouth. I've heard it all over town, usually when a woman's back is turned." I was just funning, Griff," Bart stammered, his courage vanishing. "My name is Mr. Hayes to you," Griff said. He took one step closer. "And we're not funning. You ever speak to Miss Vance again, or about her, in any way, but with the respect she is due, and I will personally knock every tooth in that loud mouth of yours loose. Do you understand me?" Bart, a man a head taller and 50 pounds heavier than Griff, turned pale. He nodded, unable to speak. "Good. Now you and your friends can clear out." They scattered like quail. The street was now silent. The only people left were Griff Ilara and the few remaining townsfolk watching from a distance, stunned. Ilara was still frozen, tears streaming down her face, her body trembling with humiliation and a strange, powerful relief. Griff turned to her. The coldness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, aching tenderness. He saw her tears, her shame, her absolute mortification. He walked slowly toward her, stopping directly in front of her. She was leaning on her crutch, her head bowed, her chestnut hair falling to hide her face. Even with her limp, even bowed, she was still taller than him. She was the giantess. She was the oddity. The town was watching. They were waiting to see what the man who'd just spent a fortune would do with his freak. Would he lead her away like a prize cow? Would he laugh at her now that the show was over? Griff didn't do any of those things. He looked at her bowed head, at this strong, magnificent woman, brought low by the smallness of others. He did something no one in Salvation Creek could have ever predicted. He reached out his hand, gentle, and put a finger under her chin. "Ilara." She slowly raised her head, her eyes red, her face streaked with dust and tears. She looked down at him, her gaze full of pain and confusion. He smiled. A small, sad, beautiful smile. And then, in front of everyone, Griff Hayes stood on his toes. He reached up, and he kissed her gently on the forehead. It was not a kiss of passion. It was not a kiss of ownership. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated reverence. A kiss that said, "I see you. I respect you. You are worthy." A kiss that met her where she was, high above everyone else, and honored her for it. Ilara's breath hitched. A sound half sob, half gasp escaped her. The town held its breath. The silence was absolute. Griff lowered his heels, but he didn't let go of her. He took her trembling hands in his. "I didn't buy your land to own it, Elara." He said his voice loud enough for the onlookers to hear, but his words meant only for her. "I bought it to protect it, and I didn't buy it for you. I bought it. Well, I was hoping to buy it with you." She stared at him, uncomprehending. What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm a cattleman with a lot of money and no land," he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "And you're the best rancher in this county, with the best land and no money. Seems to me we have a problem we can solve." He held her gaze. "I'm looking for a partner, Elara, a full partner, 50-50, to run the new Hayes Vance ranch. That is, if you'll have me." Partner. He wasn't offering her a job. He wasn't offering her charity. He was offering her equality. Elara looked at this man, this average-height, quiet, steel-spined man, who had seen her strength as a virtue, not a curse. He had defended her, saved her ranch, and in one public, gentle gesture had shattered a lifetime of ridicule. Her height, her flaw, was the very thing that had made his kiss on her forehead so profoundly respectful. He had to reach for her, and he had in every way that mattered. The tears started again, but they were not tears of shame. "I'd like that, Mr. Hayes," she whispered. "Griff," he corrected, smiling. "Griff," she repeated. He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm, then bent and retrieved her fallen crutch. He handed it to her. "Let's go home, partner," he said. Elara Vance stood to her full, magnificent height. She took his arm, and together, the Vance giantess and the quiet cowboy walked down the main street of Salvation Creek, leaving the stunned, silent town behind them. And so Elara and Griff rebuilt the Vance Hayes Ranch, and in doing so, they rebuilt a life. The town that had once mocked her height now looked up to her, not just because she was tall, but because she was strong, respected, and loved. Her height once, her greatest shame, became a symbol of her resilience. Alistair Finch's power in the county waned, his name a bitter memory, while the Vance Hayes brand became synonymous with integrity and a new kind of strength. Elara learned that true worth isn't measured by how small you can make yourself, but by how tall you're willing to stand. And she learned that the right person doesn't try to cut you down to size. They meet you where you are, and they rise to the occasion. If you were touched by Elara's story of overcoming prejudice and finding a love that saw her for who she truly was, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories where the underdog gets the justice they deserve. Thank you for watching.